Welcome back to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry. Here's your host, Brother Robert Johnson.
Welcome back to episode number 406 of the WCY podcast. This week we've got a great program. I have an interview with Brother Patrick Dey from the Rocky Mountain Mason magazine. And we've also got a brand new Masonic Minute from illustrious Brother Stephen L. Harrison. Before we get started, if you've been under a rock, go to www.MasonicConChicago.com. We're going to do this new Masonicon kind of centrally located here in Chicago, so central to the United States. We've had them on the East Coast, the West Coast, and the Mid-Atlantic area with Esotericon, but nothing here in the center. So we are doing that. I'm planning it for next September, so 2020, not this upcoming, but a year from now. It's going to be fantastic. Head to the website to check out the details, but most importantly, a couple details. One, this is an event that is limited, so 150 tickets is what we're going to sell. After that, sorry. Number two is that number drastically decreases when you consider the audience for this is open. So that means it's not just Master Masons. Anybody can come. If you're a fan of esoterics, you can come. If you are a member of the general public and you're just curious, you can come. So there's going to be a lot of great things, and it's going to be a mixing pot of people. That means anybody can buy a ticket. It's a lot more limited than you think. Number two, there will only be about 100 tickets to the festive board. And number three, we will offer a discounted rate ticket. Now, when that comes out, the people who know about that stuff first are going to be the people who sign up for the emails from Masonicon. So if you want to be added to the email list, go to MasonicConChicago.com and put your email in, and it's just going to me. This isn't like an outside agency. I'm doing all the PR work for it. I'm organizing it. So if you trust me, I hope you do, then you know this is coming direct from me. I'm using GoDaddy.com as our kind of media push out. So just make sure we don't go to spam. I don't share your email address with anybody else. I promise. We have some substantial updates. Those people all got the update last week. I can tell you all now, we have 11 speakers scheduled and who have accepted. We have a 3-day event. And most importantly, we have our logo, which is really fantastic. We are going with an Art Deco theme. I want you to think about the World's Fair back in Chicago, and the White City is what it was called, right? It was this really great time in terms of invention and a celebration of worlds, coming together. So I really like the Art Deco style. I love World's Fairs, and so does my good friend Spencer. And I asked him to design the logo, which he did, and it's great. So anyway, we've released the logo for Masonicon 2020 in Chicago here, and the big news this week is that we have a theme, which is Art Deco. And so you can expect the event to be kind of 1920s, 1930s themed. It'll be really cool. But it's a year away, so we have lots to plan. Let's go ahead and move right into the program. I would like to get the interview going. I'm going to be super busy this week putting together 2 episodes back to back, and then I have to come home and do another one really fast because I've got a couple trips lined up, and I'll be at Camp Masonry this week. I hope to see all of you there. Jason, Joe Martinez, Mike Hambrick, Chris Maddy. There's going to be a bunch of dudes at this thing, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So we'll leave you with that. We'll get into the interview right after this. Now comes the point in the show where I ask you to help support this show. How do we do that? Well, we have a bunch of different ways to do that today. If you head on over to WCYpodcast.com, you can click on direct donation through PayPal, which we briefly touched on. in the beginning of the program. Of course, you can make that one-time donation, or you can sign up to be a monthly contributor. Contributing $2 a month, $5, or even $10 a month, whatever you choose, really helps the program out. Of course, we have a limited edition shop where you can pick up any number of items that come direct from us. Help us out by going to MasonicRevival.com, but also we have some other affiliates that are really important. Banker's Best, one of the most unique things we've ever done, is to work with Brother Levi Banker out of St. Louis, who owns his own company called Banker's Best Beard and Skincare. He's been so generous. If you head to WCYpodcast.com, click on More, then click on Banker's Best, and you can check out a bunch of the different products he's got. He's got a whole line of beard care products, skin care, oils, balms, all of this stuff, and he has been doing it a long time. He knows a lot about it. Everything is handmade, quality items. We even came up with the King Solomon's Reserve Beard Balm, which is a few years old now, but remains one of the great products that he still offers. Even the artwork on the bottle was done by a brother. The nice thing about this particular product is 50% of the proceeds come back to the program. If you're a history guy like me, then you'll be pleased to know that what makes the beard oil and balm very special is that it was made utilizing the fragrances specific to the exports of King Solomon's time and location, which is amazing. So black fig and honey is the formula. Luxurious scent, as Levi says, truly fit for our first Grand Master. If you use the promo code BBWCY357 at checkout, you'll also get a little bit of a percentage off. Please check that out. Banker's Best, or just head on over to buybankersbest.com. We also have a code with On It. You can go to our website, click on More, then go to On It, and you can click through any of the links here, or just go to onit.com and use the promo code WCY at checkout. You'll get 10% off, and they'll send a little bit back to the program to help us out. And of course, it's business time. The book that I wrote with John T. Ruark, it is making some real waves, and people are using it and seeing success. So check that out on Amazon. You can click right to it. You can get it on Audible, Kindle, or in print, even on iBooks. And last but not least, I want to ask you to check out the Great Books program. You'll see the banner for it on the left-hand side, Intellectual Linear Progression. Use the promo code WCY, or you can just click on that link there, and you'll actually go right to the website and hear a little bit from Scott Hambrick about how awesome the program is. So that's it. I hope you guys enjoy, and thank you so much for helping us out. All right, everybody, we're back this week. I told you that I was working on some interviews, and here it is. We've got our first interview in quite a while, and we're lucky enough to have Brother Patrick Dey on the program. Brother Patrick, thanks for coming on.
Hi, Robert. How are you?
I'm doing really well. It's been a little while. We tried to schedule this in the past, and I had some tech difficulties, but I'm glad that you were able to find some time out of your busy schedule and hang out with us for a little while we talk about what you're up to and what you're into.
Well, I'm glad to be here, so let's get started.
Yeah, sure. So first and foremost, what is your lodge name, number, your Grand Lodge affiliation?
Well, my home lodge is Boulder 14, jurisdiction of Colorado, though the lodge I spend the most time with and I am currently worshipful master of is Nevada Lodge number 4 in the ghost town of Nevadaville, Colorado.
I don't know that I've ever had a worshipful master of a ghost town lodge on the program before. Probably a first, and it'll probably not happen again unless we get one of your successors on the program.
We do commonly call ourselves the only ghost town Masonic lodge, though that's a bit unverified. I do know a lot of the surrounding states. I have verified that they don't have a ghost town lodge, but I've heard a rumor there's one in Canada, though I've not verified that.
Do you guys ever get to use the excuse, like, if not a lot of people show up to the meeting, you could say, well, it is a ghost town?
I wish we could use the excuse of, well, the ghost will be the Tyler.
Perfect. Well, let me ask you this. So before we kind of jump in, you're a younger brother, you're 32. What got you into Freemasonry? What kind of drew you in?
Well, when I became a Mason, I was studying architecture. I was in architecture school. I've long been fascinated by mythology, esotericism, mysticism, the occult. things like that. Deep symbolism. At the time, I was reading a lot of Carl Jung, and as well as Sigmund Freud a bit, but mostly Jung. And I knew a couple of Masons, and a lot of the stuff I was reading, like Mircea Eliade, it bring up Masonry every once in a while. Some of the guys I was actually reading were actually Masons, like A.E. Waite, and so I knew a couple of Masons, and I just started asking. It actually took quite a while to actually get a petition and get it signed.
You don't say. That's kind of out of the ordinary. Most of the time, they just whip them right out of their pocket pre-signed.
I know. Well, a lot of times, there's the 6-month period, but it actually took me like 2 years.
Wow.
I just kept asking.
Wow.
But eventually I did become a Mason. And
how long ago was that?
I was 24, so 7 years ago.
Yeah, you're 32, came in 24. I didn't join a lodge until I was 27 and 37 this year, so 10 years. Maybe I'll be 38 this year. So yeah, time flies, I guess, in Masonry. Now you're the master of your lodge, right on schedule, kinda.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Well, even then, I was like kind of inactive for a period. I moved back to the East Coast, and I visited a couple of lodges, and then I came back to Colorado, and I wasn't all that active for a brief period. Almost 2 years I was inactive. And then I came back to Colorado, kind of took a minute, but I jumped right back in, and next thing I knew, they were just throwing me into lines, and hey, join the York Rite, and then they were like, join the Scottish Rite, and to this day, I still have not joined Scottish Rite because I'm too busy.
Well, to your credit, right? I mean, it speaks to your ability that they want you in, and you've gone this far, right? You're a doer. So, and that's apparent because, as a lot of people know, we read one of your pieces here on the program a couple weeks back.
Which I appreciate.
Yeah, on Solomon and some of his magic, and we had a focus on 3 or 4 episodes on the Shamir, and just a fascinating thing. So you wrote this article, and you've been writing articles. I've read a lot of your work, actually. My buddy Scott, who was a member in Colorado, he was in Denver Lodge, and he turned me on to the Rocky Mountain Mason magazine, and you had some of the first articles that I read. How'd you get involved with Rocky Mountain Mason?
Oh, a friend of mine, also named Scott, some years ago, introduced me to the publisher, Ben Williams. And anyway, he said, you got to meet this guy, Ben. He runs this magazine. You can probably publish, some of your writings in there. And so he got the 2 of us together, and the 3 of us hung out, and Ben and I were kind of getting along, and then we realized like we were going to have a friendship that would go far and wide just because I brought up Trithemius, and he said the very fact you even know who Trithemius is means we'll get along just fine, Patrick. And so I started sending him articles, and I think there's only like 1 issue since I started that I didn't submit something. But about a year and a half, 2 years ago, Ben was really busy. He's got newly married, just bought a house, got a kid coming along the way. Business is up and rolling. I think he was the deputy grand commander of the Grand Commandery.
Wow.
Or else he already was the grand commander by that point. He was just super, super busy. And I was talking with him, and I just said, do you need help on the magazine? And he said, yes, absolutely. I hereby make you the editor. So pretty much since I've been just collecting content, images, editing, pulling together all the content for the magazine. Actually, a previous guy you've interviewed on the podcast, Pablo Columban.
Yeah.
Yeah, some years ago you interviewed him. He's the art director. He does all the layout.
Yeah, I had heard about that. He was, I think, the master at the time of Denver.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, we had on in a segment 10 questions for 10 worshipful masters, and we did 10 episodes of random masters, and his name popped up, and we got him on. He was fantastic.
Yeah, he's a great guy, and he does a good job with the layout of the magazine.
Absolutely.
The work he does is incredible, and I think Ben feels a little bit relieved because now he can focus on subscriptions, marketing, actually distribution. He still proofs everything at the end. He still goes through the entire magazine, but he's not dealing with all that other stuff.
Right.
Anyway, so we've had a merry little team since.
That's perfect. Yeah, it takes 3 sometimes, so I know how it can get. Before we get into some of your other work that I want to ask you about, I'll break in with kind of an icebreaker weird question, and that is, what is your biggest Masonic pet peeve?
Ooh. I'm gonna think about this one.
All right, I'll wait, because we edit the show.
I got a few. I'm just want to think of a good one. My biggest Masonic pet peeve. Actually, I think this would go with something you had on a previous episode in the Masonic Minute of the guys always say, we want more education, and then they don't go get it. Or it's laid out right there in front of them, and they don't go for it.
Well,
or there's Research Lodge, and they don't ever attend, and they don't ever join. And there's magazines, there's podcasts, there's all kinds of media for Masonic education and consumption, and they don't go for it. I don't know why. It's probably the one thing that annoys me above anything. I don't know what it is. And
well, I think you're onto something there. We have this issue where we promise to do great things with a man, and largely we get distracted by the accolade and the titles, and we get to progress without showing proof of knowledge of the practical side of things, and we just kind of move along. You know, you can join anything you want, and you don't ever actually have to do anything. So because I think we don't have to do it, we just get in the habit of not doing it, not wanting the education.
Yeah, that's interesting. Albert Mackey actually wrote like an opinion piece over a century ago of, I think it was like, he called it like Masonic books or something like that.
Yeah, there's one he did. This is Masons who read and Masons who don't read.
Yeah, that's it. And where he bemoans the guys who are always going after titles and degrees and accolades and accoutrements and whatnot, but they never go get the book written by a brother, or, you know, subscribe to this Masonic magazine or whatever they had in their day.
Yeah, that's a crotchety piece, man. He gets into it.
He really does. But I don't know. I always wonder if they say Masonic education because they don't know of anything better to say of what they would want, which would, I think, would be a failing on the craft as a whole for providing readily available resources and whatnot for these guys to go, I do want that, I will go for it. And I don't know if it's they don't know what to want, or if it really is just they say they want education, but they actually don't.
What an interesting thread you've pulled there. Just in the fact that we don't exactly know what we want. That's a really interesting concept. I mean, I think it was the Grand Lodge of Colorado who ran the famous survey back in the day, and they asked people why they demitted or didn't pay their dues, and an overwhelming majority of them said that they didn't know what they were joining until after they did it, and then they left. And you have to ask. You have to say, well, wow, that's a really large failure on our part for not informing somebody. That's a really interesting answer. I really like, we'll have to think about that. Maybe an episode in the future.
Maybe.
Let me ask you about some of your work. It's really varied. You've written some wonderful historical pieces where you've dove in and picked apart things. You've talked about some legends that have no basis in fact. I mean, you've done some really good work. What's something you're working on right now? I know you have an interest in a famous Masonic poet.
Yes. So I like to jump back and forth between symbolism and the esoteric and the occult, and then
one has to do that.
Yeah, and then I jump over into history stuff. So I think it keeps me a good balance. I think the spiritual informs the historical, and the historical informs the spiritual. The past Grand Master of Colorado, it's been occupying a great deal of my time lately in research, is Lawrence Nichols Greenleaf. There's a lodge named for him here in Colorado, and he was a poet. He was an entrepreneur, a very successful businessman. He was also a jokester and a really funny guy. Even before he became a Mason, he used to write little quips and quirks, as he would call them, for the Rocky Mountain News, the first newspaper in Colorado. He was good friends with the publisher of it, who was also a Mason. and he'd write just these funny little jokes. A lot of them today we'd call them dad jokes because they seem really lame to us today, but they're actually quite clever and punny. He loved puns, hence he went by an alias that was Peter Punever. And I've recently just found a stack of old Square and Compass magazines, which he ran for about 40 years.
Wow.
And I'm looking through about 10 years worth of them, and I still find in there that he still makes little jokes and funnies in there. He was still funny even in his old age. So I always love that he was very lighthearted, very mirthful. It's easy for us to look at old photos of Masons and take them too seriously. And I think it's great with Greenleaf that you find that he's actually really funny and very lighthearted. And
how did you discover him? How did you do? What were you doing? Were you just looking through old proceedings of Grand Lodges and then find this guy and his name appears this other place? What got you squared on this guy for a minute?
He's actually pretty famous in Colorado. Like I said, we have a lodge named after him.
Mm-hmm.
Also, like our Masonic books, like the Ritual Book and the Craftsman and whatnot, we get from the Grand Lodge, Colorado. All of them include one of his poems at the end of it, The Lodge Room Over Simpkin's Store. And it's actually a very famous Masonic poem. I've actually talked to brothers in other states who will say, "Oh, I know that poem. It's framed in my Tyler's hall, in the Tyler's room of my lodge." And so it was actually a well disseminated poem. And that was
it is. In fact, Manasseh Lodge in Virginia has that poem. I think it's Manasseh Lodge. Anyway, it's right outside in the Tyler's area before there's a bathroom over there, and I went to use that bathroom and I looked over and there was the Simpkin store and the poem. Right. You see it everywhere.
Yeah. So it's a pretty famous poem. That's how I came across him. It was the picture you see of Simpkin's store and the poem with it and really nice frame and whatnot was done by the ancient accepted Scottish Rite Southern jurisdiction. It was like a centennial or bicentennial thing they did, and they produced like some 350 of them.
Well, you can get one if you become a member, Patrick.
Oh, really?
No, I'm just kidding, but I'm just trying to get you to join.
So that's how I first came across him, and then maybe a year or two later, I got I don't know if you've ever seen the Little Masonic Library.
Oh yeah, those are fantastic.
Yeah, so one of those has a whole section with a collection of Masonic poems, and there's like 3, 4, maybe 5 of them that are Greenleaf poems. And I found those, and I just, wow, this guy is actually a really good poet. And I found that there's not a lot written about him, or at least it's hard to find. So
that's because he's like the photographer who takes all the family pictures. He's just not in any of them, right?
Yeah. Actually, he was pretty much a landmark of Colorado. I found some old books on the history of Colorado, like early Colorado, like 1870, 9 years after it became a state, and then later on in like 1920s. And I found there's several books on Colorado and Denver that have a whole page, like a whole section dedicated to him. And then I just started using, the public library, and it turns out they actually have some great resources to find information on people you would think is obscure. And just started uncovering more and more and more, and this is how I found him in the Rocky Mountain News, and his alias is Peter Punever. Started finding a lot of his little quips and whatnot. He actually first was publishing poetry in that newspaper. And then I actually started to dig into old Grand Lodge proceedings, and he was the chairman of several committees for a long time. When he was the chairman of the necrology committee, which he actually helped create that committee, he would write a poem for every deceased brother who was of like notability, so like a past Grand Master or like a celebrity or something.
Talk about dedicated, man.
Yeah, And then he'd write another poem to all the deceased brethren of Colorado. And then he would write another poem to all the deceased brethren across the globe. And he would do that every year for like 30 years.
Wow.
So yeah, and I still have a lot more material I've been going through. It's part been just collecting the raw material, and then once I kind of hit a stopping point where it's like, wow, I've exhausted all of that, then I'll actually start analyzing and going through a lot of that stuff. And
You think you're going to do a book?
actually, that's kind of my plan, is not really like a book on him per se, but rather I'd like to take a lot of his poetry, pretty much all the poetry I can ever find of his, and I'd like to collate it all together, and including republishing his only published book, which was a collection of whimsical poems called King Sham and Other Atrocities. It's a very satirical, actually rather pessimistic and comical set of poems. I'd like to pull all the poetry of his I can find, and along with various other things like his Grand Master's address, the address when he was the presiding officer of the laying of the cornerstone of the Arapahoe County Courthouse, a building that's no longer standing, and then maybe like a 25, 30-page bio on him.
Let me ask you this. So, as somebody who looks at somebody like this, where they are prominent in Masonry, but also, it sounds like, very prominent in the community, in the state, and when you write a book on somebody like this, being a Mason yourself, do you suppose that the Masonic element of it will be more of a minor piece of a book, or do you think you'll write it from a point of view that is generally Masonic? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I recently did a presentation on him, his life and his works at the Research Lodge of Colorado just last week, and actually I primarily focused on his business adventures, why he came to Colorado, his children. His second son was actually a famous stage artist and magician who went by the name Eugene Laurent. And I actually focused more on his life than the Masonic elements, but I bring in Masonry every once in a while because it was a critical aspect of his life. But he was such a multifaceted individual that it's hard to focus on just the Masonic stuff.
I would agree. We tend to pigeonhole things like that sometimes. We find somebody in the craft who is amazing, and then when we tell the world about them, or the Masonic world, it's like, you all know about Masonry. Let me tell you about what this guy did over here.
Mm-hmm. And I've been working on it as I go, is footnoting things, like reading through his Grand Master's address. He actually cites a lot of ritual. He'll say a lot of things that come directly from our ritual. And it's important that I call that out, because I don't want to shut off Greenlee from non-Masons, because he actually is a very fantastic poet.
Yeah.
And he is a very funny guy. And he was very eloquent and a fantastic writer, and just all around a very awesome individual. And I don't want to shut him off from non-Masons, but when you get into the Masonic stuff, it's important that, for me, that I call out, like, this is actually directly from Masonic symbolism. This is directly from Masonic ritual, something along those lines.
Of his works, do you have a favorite poem?
It would probably have to be King Sham itself. It's a really funny poem. It's very pessimistic and very satirical. In the poem, it's like 20, 30 page long poem. And in it, he starts off describing King Sham, who rules over his domain of humbug. And he talks about how everything is a farce, everything is coerced, all the marble is fake, all the food is, it's just junk. Everything that shines is really just cheap tinsel. And so he does a beautiful job illustrating just this farce of a king and a kingdom.
Who do you think he was referencing? I mean, most of us if we write like this, we have somebody in mind. or maybe an amalgamation?
Everybody.
Just everybody.
It's everybody, because then he starts to get into, this is really just society, and to quote him, he says, society is a sham, without a doubt. And he proceeds to go through everything. I mean, it doesn't matter. Politics, religion, judges, and criminals, it doesn't matter. He just picks apart everything in society and just satirizes them, and in a very comical way. And in many ways, it still resonates today. It's kind of like Mark Twain, if Mark Twain focused on poetry more instead of, novels, because a lot of it's still relevant today, and he's very satirical, but that's kind of a one-off poem in being that critical of things. A lot of things are just good old fun, like he writes about the turkey wars in Colorado, and the early pioneers, and what a crappy condition it was to live in the frontier of Colorado in 1859. King Sham is just a really funny poem. It's one I've read about 5 or 6 times by this point.
Now, is there a place where listeners could read that before you put out something? The
entirety of King Sham and Other Atrocities is on Google Books. You can find it. It's there. You
Wonderful.
can read it.
We'll put a link to it in the show notes for everybody. So I want to ask you a little bit about Masonry in Colorado. Over the course of years, when I came into the craft in 2008 or 2007, Colorado was in a weird place. I remember there was a Grand Master that got elected from the floor, and there was change happening in Colorado. And it was really interesting to live, not in Colorado. And we viewed what was happening in Colorado as revolutionary.
Oh, I remember what you were talking about. Yeah, it wasn't that he was just directly elected from the floor. He had served in the Grand Line up before Deputy Grand Master, and then he was taken out of the line. And then a lot of people just thought we actually wanted him to be Grand Master. So just by vote, they just elected him back in to be Grand Master. So it was probably one of the most unorthodox elections I've ever seen.
Yeah, but what's interesting about it is, and then Colorado has a history with not only really great education coming from the Research Lodge, but also the magazine. Like, the Rocky Mountain Mason magazine is not affiliated, right, with Grand Lodge, or is it?
Nope, it's not. We're kind of in this weird state with if we can be affiliated with anything officially. We talked about it in Research Lodge. We voted that, Research Lodge would promote the magazine, and members of Research Lodge can get a discounted subscription to the magazine, but it really can't be affiliated with any lodge,
right?
Because it was started outside of it, and there's an article in our constitutions that say you can't use your position as a Mason to elevate yourself or promote your business or make money in any sort of way like that.
Right.
Like, the magazine's fine, but you can't just go and say, let's be supported by Research Lodge or some other lodge or by the Grand Lodge, because we were told that's a violation of the constitutions, which puts us in this funny gray area.
It's pretty common amongst media creators within Freemasonry, right? Like, if I'm doing a podcast, my Grand Lodge knows I do it. They liked a few episodes that they listened to. They can't endorse it, obviously. And I think it's important to have that independence. But I think where I wanted to go with this line is that Colorado seems to have an edge with technology or policies. Things kind of move West Coast to the East Coast, or maybe unless they start, off in New York and come down. But like with a lot of things that happen in Masonry, we hear about things happening in Colorado and then kind of filtering out. What's it been like to be an active member in Colorado outside of your couple of years that you were inactive, but kind of being trendsetters there in a way?
That's actually news to me that we're trendsetters, but that's nice to hear. Policy-wise, I actually kind of feel like we're in a stalemate, because we have a lot of people who don't want change, and we have a lot of people who do want change. And for some odd reason, that supermajority always always holds out. For like the last 3 years, we've tried to make some major revisions to our Book of Constitutions. And our Book of Constitutions still refers to multiple jurisdictions because Colorado created lodges in Utah, Wyoming, Montana, and I think one other jurisdiction. And so, there weren't Grand Lodges there yet. So our constitutions refers to multiple jurisdictions, and it's like we couldn't even get that changed out of it. It got voted down. And so for 3 years, we've gotten no changes to our Book of Constitutions. But on the other end, technology-wise, we are moving forward in some great ways. A number of jurisdictions have been doing this, and we're hopping on board, and the Education Committee is just driving full force right now with, we just decided we were going to get a new website. We were going to start these videos of introduction to things like Welcome to Masonry, or, the rules of the gavel, explanations of the apron, and then we're pulling in a lot of content from like old service letters, past papers of research lodge, and so we're pulling together these curricula for entered apprentices, fellow crafts, and master masons. And so essentially, when we get it up and running, you'll be able to log in, pretty much, what's your name, what's your lodge, what are you, are you an entered apprentice, fellow craft, or master mason? And essentially, it will verify it and then let you in, and you'll be able to view all the content for entered apprentices if you're an EA, and so forth, and all be relevant stuff to that, and get it set up for mobile devices such as your phone, a tablet. So books, guys like to buy Masonic books, but actually reading them, not so much, but being able to just go online and just pull up an ebook or pull up, this video where they just explain the protocol of the gavel or explain the officers of the lodge and who are they to entered apprentices. And it's this education curriculum. Gotten pretty far along with it so far. It has not been officially launched, but we've had some test runs with it, and it's going along pretty good. So, Education Committee's just running with it. We're hoping here in the next month we have, at least for entered apprentices, it's launched.
I love it. I love that. The problem today with, we talked about education earlier in the program, but Masonry itself, yes, it has all these great things, but is primarily, in my opinion, an educational thing. So to always have to backpedal or put it at the end of a meeting, or to not spend the majority of our cash flow educating our members, creating a value for them to be there, is a mistake. Mm-hmm. So I laughed so heartily actually when you said guys love to buy books, read them. That is absolutely true. I can't tell you how many Instagram posts I see. It's like a stack of great books, and they're like, "Oh, I got all these new great books," or "Check out all these great books I'm reading." And you can definitely see those spines have not been cracked. There is no crease.
I actually read mine, even when I get old ones like Jeremy Cross's True Masonic Chart, the hieroglyphical monitor.
Sure.
I have a 1850s or 1860s copy of it, but it's so fragile that I just then bought a paperback. So I have my nice, delicate antique book, and then I have the crummy paperback, which is dog-eared and bookmarks and just long, lines and highlighting and notes in the margin all over the place. So.
That's the way a book should be. If you don't, everybody, my son asked me, I was going through and I'm just writing in books, that I have, and he says, "Dad, what are you doing? Why are you writing in your books? That's what paper's for." I'm like, "Why do you think the margins are so big on these books?" You find some old reprints or whatever, and they're just fantastic for that.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, what is your hope? We hear a lot of things today about the future of Freemasonry, and whether it's the northern jurisdiction and they've got their, social media and marketing campaign for Masonry. We have your local lodge places who lodges are struggling. You've got new lodges popping up all over California these days because of the way they made it easy to make lodges. And we hear articles saying, Masonry is dying. Some people say it's growing, it's refining, as my kind of take on things. I'm not a big promoter. I say let everything slough off, and what's left is prime time, or maybe we don't deserve to be around.
Yeah, no, I agree with that latter point. To bring this back to Greenleaf, he actually, great poem he wrote of his. One of his Masonic poems was called "Live On, O Masonry, Live On," in which he says, no, it's not getting worse. No, it is not dying. Masonry is getting better. Live on, O Masonry, live on. I mean, it's a very upbeat and enlivening poem about these naysayers. So I think that remark of Masonry's dying has always been around, because in like the 1890s he wrote this.
Sure.
And so I think that remark's always been around. But
well, it does seem
I do have to question things like, why do our numbers need to be as high as they were when the fraternity peaked back in 1959? You know, why do we have to have so many members? Isn't it better to have quality members over quantity of members?
Well, we like to say that, but we don't like to practice it because, you know, whatever. We need that money. We need that inflow to pay for the Grand Lodge administrations and the programs and this and that.
Maybe raise our dues. In Colorado, we recognize Prince Hall, so I've been to Prince Hall lodges, and you know their dues are actually a lot higher than a lot of our lodges. You know, maybe we should raise our dues. And I know quite a few Prince Hall Masons, and because they actually pay good money to be Masons, they go to lodge.
Yep.
I have to question things like, you know, California creating so many lodges. You know, recently in Colorado, we've only created one lodge in quite a long time, and it's still under dispensation. But you know, I don't know why every little rural town needs to have a lodge, because a lot of these they can barely meet, they can barely open. They got guys driving from far, far away to try and keep this lodge alive, and I just wonder, you know, what happens when those guys can't make it to lodge? Yep. You know, are we postponing the inevitable? Maybe we do need to downsize and focus on quality rather than quantity.
A fair point, and I think we've been talking about that for a long time, and it is interesting you mentioned that the problem is still mentioned in the 1890s, and it's just kind of like the paper we talked about with Mackey, where he's talking about Masons who read and don't read. These issues are constant. I think what's interesting about Masonic literature, as we read exposés, as we read opinion pieces and the like, no matter how far back we go, we always seem to say, it sounds like this applies to even today. Mm-hmm. Because it's like the idea of packed lodges, the idea of mega education, the idea of huge numbers is kind of maybe it's a farce. Maybe it never has been, and maybe that's why we're always complaining about these things.
Yeah, I wonder if that's a myth, too. I relate it to a Walmart parking lot, because Walmart builds parking lots to be adequate for Christmas, when they'll have the most amount of cars in their parking lot, and then the rest of the time it's like half full. I just gotta wonder, you know, did we keep having these high ambitions? We kept seeing our numbers rising throughout, you know, the 40s and the 50s, and so we decided we'll build a big lodge room, and so we have this huge lodge room, and be like, these will fill up, and then for some odd reason, decades later, we go, all these rows used to be filled up, when in fact they maybe never were. It was like, and when the Grand Master came to visit that lodge, it got packed, but other than that, not really.
That's a wonderful point, actually. I've talked about it before on the program. I have one of my first Masonic mentors, a guy named Tom Love. I asked him, I said, how come only 9 guys show up to a stated meeting? And he says, Robert, it's always been that way. I'm like, no, everybody talks about packed houses. He goes, go get the minute books. And sure enough, I would pull like the minute books from the 60s to 50s. It's like the same. There's always that cadre, like 9 to 12 dudes that are showing up, taking on everything. Wow, this is crazy. I mean, it means something to these folks. But I got a question. You know, I don't want to be a jerk. You know, I understand there are people who legitimately can't make it to lodge, but I do question those bros who join and then never come back. We call those Mason in name only. And I think a few years ago, the Past Bastard, I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yes.
That blog.
Yes, I am.
So They ran a piece that was something like you could join the fraternity in name only for $1 a year or something. Like, what's it worth to you? Like, oh, cool, I get to say I'm a Mason and only pay $1 a year. That goes great. And you don't have to pay per capita. You know, we used to joke that we could do that, and then when people actually show up for a meeting, charge them $120. You can be a Mason for $1, but if you come to a meeting, you gotta pay. You gotta pay up.
I found in the old bylaws of Nevada Lodge Number 4, they actually had a coercive manner of making you a member of that lodge if you were being active. And it was, if you weren't a member of that lodge and you attended lodge more than 4 times, you had to start paying dues. And in order to pay dues, you had to become a member. So essentially, their bylaws were kind of coercing guys to demit from old jurisdictions or lodges and actually affiliate with Nevada Lodge Number 4. That went out like 5 years later. They removed that article, but it was still one of those like, wow, I guess they were really trying to get members in the beginning.
Yeah, like old weird laws.
Yeah, there's always those. They're fun though when you find those. You go, man, what prompted that?
Brother Patrick, I'm going to wrap this interview up a little right here, but I wanted to not skate past the fact that you've written, we did talk about history, we've read your work, and a lot of it is esoteric. You mentioned some of the things you read, like Jung and some of these guys, and I was actually just talking with a Midnight Freemason contributor last night, Brother Eric Marks, who is in the field of psychology, and he's going back through Jung, and he's just loving all of it. And I think what I would love to do, if you'd be willing, is to come on again the show here in a few weeks, and we can really dive into Jung or esoteric Masonry. Would you be all right to come on and talk with us a little bit about that?
Oh, that'd be absolutely marvelous. I'd be happy to do it.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank you for your time in this week's episode. I know we had to reschedule, so I want to make sure that I let everybody know he's a busy guy. You know, he's the editor. He's a busy Mason, except for not going to Scottish Rite meetings, so we'll let him off the hook this time. But, Brother Patrick, thanks so much for coming on. I should say, worshipful Brother Patrick, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really want to talk to you also further, maybe in another episode, about the ghost town and the history with that.
Okay. That'd be great as well. Thank you very much for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Absolutely. All right, again, another big thanks goes out to Brother Patrick Dey, and of course, everybody over at the Rocky Mountain Mason. Now, I did want to mention, because Patrick forgot to mention it, he's actually got almost a 5-page piece coming out on Lawrence Greenleaf in the next issue. So you're going to want to check that out just as soon as possible. You know, and if you haven't subscribed yet, it's $33. And let me tell you how fast they send you the current issue, like within a few days. So it's pretty rad. Great customer service, great magazine, great layout, as you all know. So check that out. Let's go ahead and get into this week's Masonic Minute with illustrious Brother Stephen L. Harrison.
Let's travel back in time for a few minutes. Let's set the Wayback Machine for 20 years and go back to the halcyon days of the turn of the century. Millennium fever was at its peak and Y2K was about to destroy us all, or so we heard from the panicked news media. We anticipated the heralding of the new century, and mathematicians argued over whether it started in the year 2000 or 2001. Time magazine named Albert Einstein Person of the Century. Baseball named a Team of the Century. Other groups had their picks, but as far as I know, Freemason remains silent on the subject. Many lodges name a Mason of the Year, but how about a Mason of the Century? Well, I have a nomination. That prolific Masonic author and leader, Ray Vaughn Denslow. When Denslow died unexpectedly in 1960, waves of shock reverberated through the Masonic world. While no single individual could ever be the glue that holds Freemasonry together, Ray Denslow was certainly a catalyst for that process. Denslow discovered Freemasonry through his father and grandfather, who were both members and masters of their lodges. He was fascinated with the craft to the point that he was initiated at midnight on his 21st birthday. From there, he went from being the youngest Freemason in the world to likely being the most well-known, holding a myriad of offices along the way. Grand Master of Missouri in 1931 and 32, he went on to lead other organizations, most notably serving as the General Grand High Priest of the General Grand Chapter of Royal Arch Masons from 1942 to 1946. His list of organizations, offices, and honors covers 6 pages of small print in his memoirs. As one of his colleagues put it, Ray Denslow is a promiscuous joiner. Most Worshipful Brother Denslow was also a prolific writer, perhaps the most productive Masonic author of his time. With no computers in his day, he was glued to his manual Underwood typewriter. Denslow's compulsion for writing left the fraternity with 22 books, 75 pamphlets, and dozens of magazine articles. Beyond that, for 28 years, from 1932 until his death, he compiled an annual book-length report on the state of Freemasonry in the world. Masonic leaders worldwide anticipated its release each year. This communiqué, The Masonic World, became critically important in the years leading up to World War II as the only source of information on the state of the craft in countries where ruthless dictators were shutting down Freemasonry. After the war, it provided valuable information about the efforts to reconstruct what nearly had been lost. Denslow didn't just write about the situation. He personally visited those countries to observe conditions firsthand. Those efforts gained him a worldwide fame which hardly another of our brothers has known to this day. His passing created a void in which many ways has yet to be filled. The Masonic World publication died with Ray Denslow. All that activity did not include what Denslow regarded as his crowning achievement. In 1943, he founded the Royal Arch Mason magazine, a periodical which became the largest Masonic publication in the world, and which today almost every York Rite Mason reads. Most Worshipful Brother Denslow edited and published the magazine from its inception until his death. When he passed away, his son William, best known as the author of 10,000 Famous Freemasons, took over. Denslow knew Masonic and political leaders all over the world. He dined with kings, prime ministers, and presidents. Harry Truman considered him one of his best friends. They discussed Masonic matters frequently, and he considered Denslow's writings so important that he ordered paper be made available to him on a priority basis, even when paper was in short supply during World War II. When Truman's train came through Trenton, Missouri, Denslow's hometown, on his whistle-stop tour in 1948, Truman, a Democrat, pulled Denslow up onto his car and introduced him to the crowd as "my damned Republican friend." When Denslow was not off traveling the world on behalf of Freemasonry or working on another book or article, he was in front of his typewriter recording his Masonic activities on a daily basis. There was no aspect of Freemasonry Denslow considered unimportant. In those memoirs, he chronicled mundane Masonic meetings as if they were ceremonies for kings. And those ceremonies for kings, he was part of them as well. The man was nothing less than a Masonic icon. His writings made him famous. His efforts on behalf of Freemasonry earned him respect. In 1933, he wrote an allegorical piece which, in poetic terms, described the workings, symbolism, beauty, and principles of the craft. It was entitled, I Am Freemasonry. That he was. For the Whence Came You podcast, this is Steve Harrison with the Masonic Minute.
All right, as usual, huge thanks to Brother Stephen L. Harrison, illustrious Brother Stephen L. Harrison, I should say. Denslow's memoirs that he's talking about here, they're a 2-volume set, and it's only available to the members of the Missouri Lodge of Research. But softcover and Kindle versions will be available by the end of the year, so make sure you're checking that out. When those come out, we'll make sure we share the links all over the social media, and we'll put some links into the show notes here. Additionally, in the show notes to this episode, I'm going to put a link in there back to the Missouri Lodge of Research, just in case you want to become a member, because you probably want to become a member. It's pretty rad. I guess I should mention, I got a few emails over the week expressing concerns on the Skull and Crown brand. Skull and Crown Limited was something that I started off with, and my dream was to create kind of a flagship product of a leather-bound notebook, kind of a system, and branded as a specific thing. And as always happens in the real world, people create and they plan, and sometimes it falls, on its face. And Skull and Crown did not fall on its face. It's just that we worked with distributors and suppliers, and it just isn't going to happen right now. So I have transformed Skull and Crown Limited into a blog page where I'll be doing some writing on things outside of Masonry. Sometimes it's connected, sometimes it isn't, but mostly it's just some musings and reviews of tech products or secretarial products or paper or ink or pens, or it's kind of my love of that stuff. And if you share that, then I invite you to check it out at your leisure. If it's not your thing, then I totally understand, and no hard feelings if you decide to stop reading it now that we're not focused on product. There may still be in the future a product or something that we can put together, but it's just not a priority at this moment. We've got a few other things happening with the podcast and things that are taking precedent. We've got, I think it's fair to make a somewhat of a big announcement. We've got a new audio book that's coming out. It is a very popular book by a popular Mason, and he's given me the okay to create the audiobook, which we did, and we did it with very select few brothers doing readings from the book, and we have the author reading one of the sections of the book as well. So do you think you know who it is? What book it is? We'll see. I am actually wrapping a lot of the details up in the next week, and then we should be releasing likely, you should be able to pick it up on Audible by the end of the month, I would think. So that is it for this week. Again, I want to thank everybody out there who helps out this program. I want to thank everybody out there who buys our lapel pin and proudly shows that off in their pictures, tags us on Instagram, all those good things. I'd invite you to the Midnight Freemasons blog, where we publish 3 articles every single week, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Right now, Todd E. Creason is publishing on Fridays this summer, and it's been really fantastic. And last but not least, don't forget to check out MasonicConChicago.com. Get on that email list so you are the first person to know when the good stuff happens. That's it. So until next week, unless I see you at Camp Masonry, stay on the level. For Whence Came You, I'm Robert Johnson. Take care.
You've been listening to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry with your host, Brother Robert Johnson. Be sure to join us for our next edition.